Hi everyone! So today we're going to introduce the reproductive system. We'll talk about the basic functions of the male and female reproductive system, as well as cover the basic anatomy as well. So the basic function, as you may have guessed, is to reproduce and to bear live offspring. Right? So for males, that means producing and delivering sperm. For females, it's producing eggs and being able to nourish a growing fetus and then deliver a healthy offspring. So that's what we'll be looking at today. Before we get into the specifics of the reproductive system, it's important to review the process of meiosis. Right? So hopefully you remember from biology class that this is a special type of cell division that results in 4 genetically unique sex cells or gametes, right? So sperm and egg, right? It's similar to mitosis. It happens twice, but we end up with half the number of chromosomes in each cell that results. Okay, so that way when we have half of the cells needed for an organism in a sperm, half in an egg, when they come together through fertilization, we end up with a diploid cell, which is also called a zygote. So that it has the full complete number of chromosomes that make up an individual. So that was a little bio review. All right, so we're going to start with the male anatomy. We're not going to go into too many specifics, but we'll cover the basic stuff. So we've got, if you're looking on the exterior, right, we've got the penis. Functions to deliver sperm, right? That's its job. Sperm delivering system. Has a rich supply of nerve endings as well. The scrotum is also on the outside that encloses the testes, keeps them, it's actually the only gland that needs to be kept at lower than body temperature, which is why those glands are kept outside of the body in that sac of tissue. Then if we go internally, we look at the functional units. So the testes would be the gland, the functioning gland, so that produces sperm, also produces sex hormones that helps to make those secondary male characteristics. The epididymis, so if this is the testes here, stored in the scrotum, the epididymis is this section here. So this tubing that's right outside of the testes, and this is where the sperm mature and are stored. And then the vas deferens starts here and kind of loops around the bladder. It's just a big long tube which transports the sperm from the epididymis to the urethra so it can go outside the body. Just a big long tube. And then these little tubes inside of the testes are called the seminiferous tubules, and they're coiled tubes where the sperm are produced in a process called spermatogenesis, which we'll talk about momentarily. All right, so now let's look at the path of the sperm from the testes where they are produced to where they are released from the body, from the urethra. Okay, so once they're mature, the sperm are stored in the epididymis, and then they travel through the vas deferens. Remember I said that's this big long tube, kind of loops around the bladder, and we've got some support glands here, the prostate gland, the seminal vesicle. All those guys are doing is helping to produce some fluids, basically like some food for the sperm, some fluids that help to make a more hospitable environment when they get into the vagina. Helps to regulate pH, things like that. So just kind of fluids that provide a good, healthy environment for the sperm to swim in. That is, so once those are added, it's now called semen. So there's sperm mixed with those seminal fluids. So now the semen can travel through the urethra and then be released during ejaculation into the vagina. Let's talk about sperm. So sperm are the male sex cells. They contain 23 chromosomes, right? That's half the number of chromosomes needed to make a full human. They're attracted to the ovum by chemicals that act as homing devices, which is pretty amazing. Like, how do they find this one little cell finds its way all the way to the egg? Kind of amazing. Typically takes about 1 to 2 hours for the sperm to complete the journey to the egg, because they have to swim from the vagina through the cervix, through the uterus, up into the fallopian tubes where the egg is. And we'll talk about the female in a second, but it takes a couple hours. And the sperm can actually live within the female for about 7 days. So even if the female hasn't released the egg, hasn't ovulated the day of intercourse, if she ovulates within a week, that person can still get pregnant because the sperm can actually live in there. Although they lose motility after a couple days, so they don't swim as well. They're most functional the first couple days, but they're still there, so it's possible. All right, so spermatogenesis. Remember, that's the production of new sperm cells. So essentially, meiosis that's going on inside the testes to make sperm. It occurs in the seminiferous tubules within the testes that we went over when we covered the anatomy, and males produce about 1,000 sperm every second. Lots of sperm. All right, now let's move to the female reproductive system. We'll take a look at the female anatomy, which can get a little more complex. So we'll start with the ovary. So the ovary is like the female version of the testes. That's the functional gland where the eggs are actually made and stored. So that's right up here on top of the uterus. So they're kind of floating around right above the pelvis inside the abdomen. They also produce hormones like estrogen and progesterone. Fallopian tubes, also called oviducts, connect. They're right here shown in pink. So they kind of connect the ovary to the uterus, which is this muscular pouch that you see right here. So they transport the ovum or the egg to the uterus, and that's where fertilization occurs. So this is where the sperm have to swim from the vagina all the way up through the cervix, through the uterus, and into the fallopian tubes to find the egg. Then we've got the uterus, which is this muscular pouch right here, which is just above the bladder. So you can see the urinary bladder is here. It's located just above that. And that functions to receive, implant, and nourish the zygote. So if the egg is fertilized and implants, this is where the baby will grow for 9 months in the uterus. So this is a flexible muscular tissue, so it can expand very large. And it's muscular, so when the woman is giving birth, those contractions are actually the uterine muscles physically contracting to push that baby out. And actually, when women are menstruating, those cramps that women feel are actually muscular contractions of that uterus trying to push that uterine lining out. So similar feeling to birth contractions. And then the cervix, which I'm sure you've heard the word, but you probably don't know where it is. It's this little opening of the uterus, so the base of the uterus here. Probably heard like cervix is dilated in terms of childbirth, right? So the cervix is that opening of the uterus. And when they talk about it being dilated, right, it means to open, right? So they tell the woman you can't push until you're 10 centimeters dilated, so it has to be opened enough for the baby's head to fit through before the woman starts pushing, right? No use pushing a baby out if the opening hasn't widened enough for the baby to fit through. And then the vagina, oh, I spelled it wrong. Vagina is the birth canal or the passageway for sperm, menstrual flow, baby, all that stuff. Okay, so that is the canal right here. Some people mistake what you see externally as the vagina. The vagina is actually the tube on the inside, the canal. Outside, what you see is called the vulva. So the inside is actually the vagina. From the opening to the cervix is actually the vagina. And then just a little bit more anatomy, what you're looking at here. The clitoris is the sensitive tissue. So the sole purpose is just for sexual stimulation, doesn't have any other function. Lots of nerve endings similar to the penis in males. They actually develop from the same tissue when the baby is in the womb, the penis and the clitoris. So they are similar. And then the urethra is also down there. That's the opening for urine, right? So we got the urinary bladder here. Urine comes out the urethra. Baby comes out the vagina. So they're close to each other, sometimes mistaken, but important to differentiate. Okay, so let's talk about the functioning units of the, let's see, where can I put myself here? The functioning units of the female reproductive system, the ovum, and how that ovum is produced and released. Okay, so beginning in puberty, each month, one egg, so women are born with all of the eggs that they're ever going to have. So those eggs are in their primordial follicles. That's how they're stored in the ovaries. But each month, one is chosen to develop into a follicle. And a follicle just means like there's a lot of support cells that start to surround it, kind of beef it up and fluff it up and get it ready to be released. So one gets chosen every month. Ovulation, so once it's all fluffed up in its follicle, taken care of by all these support cells, then about the middle of a woman's menstruation cycle, so about 2 weeks after her period, usually, and not always, this is different for every woman, but sometime in the middle of the cycle, ovulation happens. So this is when the egg gets released. That follicle kind of bursts open, the egg gets released into the fallopian tube where it travels down. And this is where, once it's in the fallopian tube, that is where fertilization will occur. So it'll hang out there for a couple days as it's traveling down to the uterus. And if a woman has intercourse during that time, the egg can become fertilized. And then the empty follicle, so this thing that's left over inside the ovary, it doesn't contain an egg anymore. So remember, the egg came out. So this empty follicle is called a corpus luteum. And that secretes progesterone, which is a hormone that helps to thicken the lining of the uterus to prepare for the fertilized egg. So that uterine lining becomes thicker and thicker with tissue, so that if the egg implants, the uterus can support that implanted cell and eventually house the baby and nourish it, form the placenta and all that stuff. So it's just vascular tissue. And menstruation is, so if there is no, here, I think I have another slide here. So if there is, so we've got ovulation here. Okay, so that we've got the increase in progesterone, a buildup, a thickening of that uterine wall. Down here is representing the uterine wall. And if the egg does not implant, then that lining is shed, and that's what is the girl's menstruation. The period comes out. So it's just tissue that's coming out. And then each month it builds up again. If there is no pregnancy, then it comes out every month. Okay, so all of this kind of coincides with the maturation and release of the egg, right? So we've got the maturation of the follicle, all these little support cells helping the little egg, releases it during ovulation. We've got that corpus luteum that helps to increase the progesterone. Okay, all these other hormones are helping to release the egg during ovulation. Okay, and then once that egg is released, and you don't have to worry about writing all this stuff down, but only one sperm can penetrate the cell, the egg cell. So once one sperm has penetrated the cell, it can release its nucleus into the egg. So we've got 23 chromosomes from the female, 23 chromosomes from the male. Those chromosomes come together to make a zygote, so a diploid cell with 46 chromosomes. This is a brand new individual, genetically unique. And then once that one sperm enters the egg, no other sperm can get in. So there are proteins and enzymes that get released that kind of harden the egg and make it so that no other sperm can get in. So just the one sperm is able to get in. Okay. So just to sum up, we've got kind of 10 steps here for human reproduction. First, we've got ovulation, release of the egg from the female. Internal fertilization of the ovum by the sperm cell, right? So the sperm and the egg join. The zygote is transported to the uterus. Implantation of the blastocyst, and the blastocyst is just after the egg has been fertilized, it's called a zygote, and after a couple days, once it starts developing and making more cells, those cells are dividing, it's called a blastocyst, which is an early developing embryo, implants into the uterus, then eventually the placenta forms, can maintain the developing fetus for the period of gestation, and then the birth of the child, expulsion of the placenta, so the baby needs to come out once it's full grown. And then breastfeeding is that final stage of reproduction where we can care for our newborn. And eventually the breastfeeding actually helps the maternal organs kind of get back to their normal state. It initiates uterine contractions so that uterus can shrink back down to size. Kind of amazing. All right, so we'll talk more in class. If you have any questions, let me know.